What's going on, ladies, gents, and kids of all ages? It is Eric coming back at you once again from the Nerd Cave, and today we are going to be looking at another awesome deck tech video. This time it is a fan-requested deck that I'm very excited about. It's going to be a cool kind of budget option. We'll talk a little bit more about that. As always, before we jump into that, I have to give a big shout out to the Patreons for making a giveaway on the channel possible. Don't know what I would do with any of this without you guys, so thank you so much. If you haven't checked out the Patreon, there is a link in the description. There is a free option if you just want to join in on the conversation. Maybe you like what you see and you want to jump into one of those paid tiers starting at $1. We have had some recent announcements that I'm pretty excited about. We do have our first partnership, which we're going to be talking about pretty soon. I'm kind of excited about that. Once we have some cards arrive, we'll talk a little bit more about what that partnership could be. Is that foreshadowing? Maybe. But without any further ado, let's go ahead and talk about how you could possibly play Ruby Sapphire on a budget. So first of all, I dropped the cost of this deck from close to $400 down to just north of $100, so I would definitely consider this a budget option. If you're looking to go even more budget, it is technically possible, but if you can push for a $100 deck, I think that's really where you start getting into the competitive territory. There are definitely some decks you can run that are going to be in that $80 or $90 range that are going to be competitive. Heck, I've even seen some decks that are in the $50 to $60 range that are going to be competitive, but if you really want to start getting into tournament level competitive play, I think $100 is a pretty comfortable place to be. And if you're coming from any other TCG, I think most people are going to be pretty comfortable with that number in terms of checking out a game for the first time with a kind of budget option. But the first card we're going to talk about in the one drop slot is going to be 3 Vitalisphere, a 1-cost inkable item with Extract of Ruby. Pay 1 and banish this item. Chosen character of yours gains Rush, which people always think about with this card. What people don't always think about with this card is it also gives them +2 this turn. So that is definitely going to be super relevant with things like Maui being able to go ahead and just come down and take out a library, because some of your toughest matchups are going to be into people playing locations. So being able to deal with those locations a little bit better by pumping up some of your characters with stuff like Vitalisphere is fantastic. The next card, also in the one drop slot, I don't think it's going to be a surprise to anybody. We are on 4 Popsicle, a 1-cost inkable item. You know it, you love it. When you play it, you're going to draw a card, and when you banish it, you can heal something for 2. Primarily, it's just here to draw you a card and potentially draw you some more cards later in the game. Next up, in the 2-cost slot, we are on 4 Tipo Growing Sun, a 2-cost inkable 1/2 stat line. The great thing with Ruby Sapphire is a lot of the cards are common, uncommon. There are a few rares for sure, but when you start to cut down some of the bigger money rares, it's not so bad. But he is a 1/2 stat line questing for 1. When you play this character, you may put a card from your hand into your inkwell face down and exerted. So fantastic ability. It is going to let you ink uninkables, so that is always a super relevant thing to be able to do. The next one is not going to let you ink uninkables, but I think you know where we're going here. We are on 4 Sail the Azurite Sea, a 2-cost inkable action with the ability this turn you may put an additional card from your hand into your inkwell face down. That card is not going to be exerted, so Tipo's putting it down exerted. Sail the Azurite Sea, it is going to have to be an inkable card, but it comes in fully ready to use, which is fantastic, especially if you have some of those 1-cost items to use alongside this, and it's going to let you draw a card. So even if you don't have one of those 1-cost items, maybe draw into one, you never know. It's important you do get to draw the card before you have to ink. You can ink anytime during your turn. Next up, still in the 2-cost slot, we are on 3 Vision of the Future, a 2-cost inkable action. Look at the top 5 cards of your deck, put one of them in your hand, put the rest on the bottom of your deck in any order. Fantastic way to dig through so many cards in your deck. When you're looking for that specific piece that you need, you play a couple Vision in the Future, and there's a pretty high likelihood you're going to be able to dig into it, especially if you're playing a deck where you're running a lot of 3 or 4 of copies of things, at least of your primary tools. Next up, we are on 4 Sapphire Coil. This is definitely what this deck is built around. Definitely a budget card. This is an uncommon card. It is from the new set. I think they're maybe 10 cents, 20 cents, something like that, but it is a 2-cost uninkable item. During your turn, whenever a card is put into your inkwell, you may give chosen character -2 strength this turn, which is super relevant to what we're going to be doing with our removal options, but Sapphire Coil is going to be really, really good. Next up, we are on 3 of the small Sisu. Fantastic follow-up to Sapphire Coil. You go turn 2 Sapphire Coil, turn 3 you ink something, and then all of a sudden Sisu is going to be able to banish anything with 3 strength or less, because you're obviously going to be able to reduce that strength down by -2, and she is a 3-cost and inkable 1/1 questing for 1. When she comes into play, you're going to be able to banish a character with 1 strength or less. Great way to just straight up deal with those Hyrums in the mirror match. Like I said, if you have Sapphire Coil, a fantastic way to deal with anything 3 strength or less, and she's evasive, so she's a good early game kind of chip away at a little bit of questing character. Another great early game character, and the reason we are as far in on Vitalisphere as we are, is Belle, Apprentice Inventor, a 3-cost inkable 3/3 stat line questing for 1. With during your turn, you may banish chosen item of yours to play this character for free, which is just fantastic. Anytime you can play a character for free, especially on the first turn of the game, you're getting a 3/3 character down, is very, very good. Next up, an absolute must 4 of with the Sapphire Coil, we are on 4 Brawl, a 3-cost inkable action, same ability as Sisu, but it's going to pump up 1 more strength, banish chosen character with 2 strength or less. So you can hit characters with 4 strength or less if you've inked and you get that Sapphire Coil on the board. So really good going into even that mid to late game. Next up we have 4 Hiram Flaversham, Toymaker, a 4-cost inkable 1/6 stat line, still a really, really good rear end willpower stat line. Questing for 1, but what's important with this character is what he's doing when he comes down and when he's questing, and that is when you play this character and whenever he quests, you're going to be able to banish an item. You've got plenty of them in this deck to banish, and you're going to get to go ahead and draw 2 cards. So that's going to be your primary card draw. One of your secondary card draw options, and again, we're talking about commons and uncommons primarily. Obviously, Hiram is rare, but even those are a few bucks. I feel like Hiram was in a starter deck. I could be off base on that. Maybe I'm wrong. But we have Grandma Tala, Keeper of Ancient Secrets, a 4-cost inkable 3/3 stat line questing for 1, and when you play this character, look at the top 2 cards of your deck. You put 1 into your hand, you put the rest on the bottom of the deck in any order. So it's just a way to dig another card deeper. She's immediately replacing herself, and she has potential 4-cost Singer for the next card that we are going to talk about. Also a great option if you don't have an item out and you have a Hiram down, even over questing, is to just go ahead and sing How Far I'll Go, a 4-cost uninkable action song. Like I mentioned, any of those 4-cost or higher characters can sing this. Look at the top 2 cards of your deck. This is going to be even better than that Tala because it's going to put 1 of them into your hand and 1 of them into your inkwell face down and exerted. So another early game ramp card. I recognize that a lot of the cards in this deck aren't reinventing the wheel. We're really kind of tweaking the counts and trying to play into the cheaper cards and make them a little bit better so that we can keep the cost of the deck overall down. Next up, we are on 3 Maui Hero to All. Now, if you don't get enchanted Maui Hero to Alls, I think these cards are maybe like $6 or $7 a piece, so it's one of the most expensive cards in the deck. There are a couple cards, other cards in that range that we're going to talk about, but that's what adds up to the 100. Like I mentioned, a lot of those commons and uncommons are 10, 20 cents, so those are really on the minimal side of the cost. It's really these key cards that are going to be important and are going to be a lot of the cost of the deck. That being said, if you're interested in playing really any deck in Ruby, those key cards that we're talking about are going to be good across multiple decks. Maybe not so much with the bigger Sisu, which we'll talk about a little bit later, but when you look at cards like Maui Hero to All and Be Prepared, fantastic across pretty much any Ruby deck. So even though you're buying them, they're a little bit more expensive cards, they are staples across multiple decks. But Maui Hero to All, a 5-cost equals 6/5 stat line, not able to quest, but he does have Rush and Reckless, so he's going to come down and just immediately start wiping threats off the board. Next up, jumping over to the 6-cost slot, we are on 3 Madame Medusa, the Boss, a 6-cost uninkable 4/4 stat line questing for just 1, which is the reason some people go for Lady Tremaine over her. Lady Tremaine quest for 2. She also can potentially move some bigger threats, but as long as something doesn't have ward and you have that Sapphire Quill on the board, Madame Medusa is going to be able to remove a lot of stuff. With her ability, when you play this character, banish chosen opposing character with 3 strength or less. So again, if you have that Sapphire Coil out, you have ink during the turn, you can banish any character that doesn't have ward with 5 strength or less, because you're going to be able to reduce it down to 3 and then take it off the board with the Madame Medusa. Next up, jumping over to the 7-cost slot, we're on 3 Be Prepared. These cards in non-foil, we'll put a price on the screen just so I'm not crazy off base, but I want to say they're somewhere in like the $8 to $10 range. They are a 7-cost uninkable action song, banish all characters straight up. Fantastic card. There are actually a couple characters in this deck that could potentially sing that. Not that that's what you would necessarily want to do with them, but it is a potential option with the deck. Primarily, you just want to play this when the field is getting out of control, and then just take control after that with things like your Medusa, your Sisu, your Brawl, etc. So Be Prepared, really good way to clear up the field and get tempo control back in the game. Next up in the 8 cost slot, we are on 2 Tamatoa So Shiny, an 8 cost inkable 5/8 stat line. When you play this character and whenever he quests, you may return an item card from your discard to your hand. This character gets +1 lore for each item you have in play. So fantastic first ability is going to be able to let you get some of those items back. So if your Sapphire's coils got destroyed, or if you just had to banish those popsicles with your Hiram to draw cards earlier, you can start getting them back, putting them back onto the board with Tamatoa, and potentially getting some big quests in. Not to mention his fantastic stat line that's going to deal with most characters, or just kind of sit there and tank characters to the face while it quests in and potentially wins you the game. And it's significantly cheaper price-wise than the other Tamatoa. You put a play set of Tamatoas in this deck, you're talking about $200 right there. We also cut the Lucky Dimes. We cut the big Sisus down from most of these decks are playing 4. We cut it down to 2. There is an argument for not playing this at all and just playing an additional Be Prepared and maybe an additional Tamatoa. You could go that route if you don't have the big Sisus and you're trying to bring the deck down. I think switching to a Be Prepared and additional Tamatoa would probably drop the deck cost another like $25 to $30, bringing it under $100 total, so keep that in mind. But we do have Sisu Empowered Sibling, an 8 cost uninkable 5/4 stat line. It's kind of a weak stat line for its ink cost, but it does have Shift 6, so it can potentially come down even earlier than that onto those small Sisus. It is questing for 3, which is fantastic, definitely a solid quest line. And when you play this character, banish all opposing characters with 2 strength or less. So I can't stress this enough. If you're going into that turn 6, you have another character out to potentially sing, and you're in a position where you could likely ink twice, or you have 2 Sapphire coils out and you just need to ink once, you could be giving 2 things -2, and then Sisu is very likely to be coming down and wiping the board of all characters that are out on your opponent's side. Which does make her really good. So if you have the Sisus or you have the money for the Sisus, I think they are important, but I think you could get away with playing this deck with just the Be Prepareds. And last up in the 9 cost slot, we are on 2 Belle Mechanic Extraordinaire, a 9 cost inkable 7/7 stat line, questing for 3, shifting for 7 onto those 3/3 bells that we're running in the deck. And for each item card in your discard, which is likely to happen with those small bells as well as those Hirams, you're going to pay 1 less to play this character using her shift ability. So you talk about having 2 or 3 items in the bin already. She is potentially shifting for 4, which is crazy good. And whenever this character quests, you may put up to 3 item cards from your discard on the bottom of your deck to gain 1 lore for each item card moved this way. So you're talking about questing in with her, and potentially if you have 3 item cards that you're ready to send to the bottom of your deck and not see probably ever again in that game, Belle is potentially going to be questing for you for 6 at that point. So potential great lore burst. There is an argument again for potentially playing 3 of these. So maybe if you don't have those Sisus, instead you play a 3rd Belle and a 3rd Tamatoa and go top end crazy with those Bells and Tamatoas. Maybe throw a couple more items in if you steer that far into this Belle. I don't think that could hurt, but we are trying to keep the deck list cost down overall. I'd love to hear y'all's thoughts in the comments below. Do you think you just have to play the expensive cards for this deck to even be competitive? Do you think this list is viable? Do you think there's other cards I overlooked or maybe should have played instead? Do you think the count should have been tweaked? Maybe I should have been on 4 of those Sisus and 4 of those Meta Medusas. It seems pretty good so far, so I'm kind of happy with where the deck is, but as always, I welcome any other suggestions in terms of cards or anything else in the comments below. Is there a deck you would like to request to see me talk about in the future? Always let me know. I love hearing your deck ideas or hearing your deck suggestions or requests for something you've been thinking about but maybe haven't quite nailed down. I've been trying a lot of different stuff. There are some things I still think maybe aren't as viable as people want them to be. I'm still kind of messing around with the idea of a puppy deck. I think it's okay. I don't think I've quite been able to crack it just yet, but there's lots of great decks out there. Would you like to see me talk about more kind of mainstream meta decks? I've been thinking about a Sapphire Seal list myself. I know Sapphire Seal aggro has been becoming more popular, and I think that is not only great, but it's not a surprise because you have access to a lot of characters with ward and a lot of characters with resist, which really works well in terms of being kind of anti-meta when they can't hit you directly with things like their Sapphire Coil with Ruby. Those ward characters really mess them up. I think people could potentially be overlooking Wendy Darling in some instances, because I do think she is very good as a 3/1 with ward and support. That's my thoughts on the meta right now. We'll just throw that in at the end of the deck list. If you didn't know, 70% of the people watching these videos are not subscribed, so now is a great time to do so. Once we hit 3,000, we're gonna have another big giveaway coming at you, so you can win some free stuff. When you see those toys, video games, and Hiram Flavershams drawing a ridiculous amount of cards off in the distance, remember, it is not a mirage. You guys have a great day.